Hello, my name is Brendan Whelan and welcome to this presentation on my work placement at the Melbourne Rebels Rugby Club. This presentation will include the experience I gained while on my placement, the tasks completed and who it was with, my contribution to the Melbourne Rebels, knowledge and skills I have gained and also brought to the company, the effect this has had on my future career, and also will finish with some questions and answers at the end. First, let me give you some history and background into the Melbourne Rebels. The Melbourne Rebels were formed in 2011. They were the 15th team to be inducted into the Super Rugby 15 Championship. The Super 15 Rugby is held within the Southern Hemisphere and encompasses 5 teams from Australia, 5 teams from South Africa and 5 teams from New Zealand. The Victorian Rugby Union have been in place in Victoria for over 100 years, and we're very happy to grow to be able to facilitate a Super 15 side. The Victorian Rugby Union has provided an elite pathway for fellow rugby players playing now within other Super Rugby franchises to leave Victoria. Now that we can hold on to our own talent in Victoria, it is a massive bonus. The elite pathway within Victorian Rugby Union and the Rabo Direct Rebels starts from an under 12 and runs all the way up to the Melbourne Rising that play within the NRC competition, and hopefully we will have our future Victorian Rebel playing very, very soon. The population. So the first group that I worked with was the apprentice group. These players are selected from the local rugby competition and in hope that they will become a future Super Rugby player. They are aged anywhere between 17 to 23 years of age. Also working with the Victorian schoolboys, which would be the major pathway for players to be noticed on a national stage. I worked with them extensively and also brought them to the Australian Rugby Championships, at which they did very, very well. I also was the head of strength and conditioning for the under-20s team, which played in the Southern States Championships, along with players that got into the combined states team. I also worked with them. The Rebel Rising, or Melbourne Rising as they are now called, which is effectively the Rabo Direct Rebels B team, worked as the head of strength with that team, and also have been continuing to work with the Rabo Direct Rebels in the capacity of developing their off-field conditioning program for next season. Moving on to the tasks completed. My job was to design, instruct a gym and conditioning program for all the populations I was working with. How this was done was first every player had to complete a health screening form, which was provided from the Exercise Sports Science Association of Australia, which is widely used within the Australian Rugby Union. Following that, provided there was no highlighted information, they moved on to a physiological assessment, which is done in accordance to the Australian Rugby Union and is completed by our medical and physios. I observed every player going through the system. It was quite extensive and luckily for us did not highlight any issues within the players. I was also lucky enough to lead the high performance staff at the Under-20s National Championships. During this time, I looked after the physios, the medical team, and also the strength conditioning team. It was quite a large task as we were away in Adelaide for up to 6 days. On the 6th day, we played in the final. During this time, I was also responsible for hydration, nutrition, and the general well-being of all players involved. To date, I'm also still working on the off-field conditioning program for 2015-2016 season for the Rabo Direct Rebels. Off-field conditioning is quite important for the rugby players, as we also have to train them without running on the ground to save their joints. So the use of swimming, cross trainers, rowing machines and bikes is quite important to us to maintain the condition of our players without injuring them by getting to run on hard surfaces. At the end of the season, we have conducted a full feedback for every player. This included one-on-one meetings with myself as head of performance and the coaching staff. During this time, we gave constructive feedback on how the players need to improve and move their career forward. Also, what was done was a retesting to show the players where they are sitting at and where we need them to be for the following season. My contribution to the program: we had 5 players from the under-20 squad selected to play for the combined states team. That was a great feat for Victorian rugby, as we are seen as one of the smaller states and don't usually provide as many good players. Also, from the under-20 squad, we had 3 players playing the under-20 World Cup. 1 player played for Samoa and 2 players went on to play for Tonga. All 3 players played every single game for their corresponding countries, which is great exposure for the Elite Pathways program. 3 players were selected from our schoolboys tournament to play for the Australian schoolboys in the tour of New Zealand and of Fiji. This again shows the strength of our Elite Pathways program within the Melbourne Rebels. Also, on a personal note, we went through the under-20 program injury-free of any soft tissues, which is a positive in any strength and conditioning program, to show that the load was monitored very well and the players looked after themselves following a strict recovery protocol. The knowledge I gained while on experience was periodizing a full rugby season. In itself is quite difficult because at times you always have to work with individuals on an elite pathways program, as each young player is not identical. As mentioned, we had to work with individuals as well as team needs together. What I mean by that is working with the coaches for what they want as an overall picture. In this instance, the under-20s, the coaches wanted more power and strength from the players and repeat efforts. Some of our players did not meet the protocols that were required to move on to power lifting, so they maintained a strength program within the gym along with small power elements added. Also, my knowledge of communication with the coaches and medical staff. For a strength conditioning coach to be successful, there has to be open lines of communication with the coaches and their needs, and also the medical staff, in finding out if a player is injured, what we have to pull back on their training, and or if they've got any illnesses and removing them from training. During this time, we worked heavily on mobility and recovery, using the Supple Leopard by Startlet and Cardoza, using power bands. This was highly effective, as when the players arrived for training, they were instructed into a circuit with the power bands to improve the mobility. And as previously mentioned, we went through the season without any soft tissue injuries. This showed the importance of prehabilitation, so we do not end up with any serious injuries, and also the general well-being of these junior athletes as they are growing both physically and mentally. We also worked heavily on on-field warm-up drills that the players conducted before the coaches arrived. This puts a lot of onus back on the players to look after their own body, and the players were very receptive of this. The skills that I gained was designing programs with the use of periodization for sports by Tudor Bumpta. This was a highly effective reference tool to use. Having to be proficient in the use of Microsoft Windows Excel, as every program we had was written in Excel, along with graphing for feedback for the coaches to illustrate where the player's position was, has improved dramatically since I started. Again, working with mobility training and using this in the future will be highly effective for future players. And communication with the coaches, this got better as the season went on, and I received some good feedback from the coaches on this. The value of the experience showed me that you just don't have to be practically proficient in what you do. You have to be book smart as well as being practically proficient. Also, be proactive and not reactive. So always be 2 steps ahead, knowing that that players that play on weekends, if their load is too high, pull it back. There's no point in reacting to injuries. If you can prevent injuries and prevent fatigue, that will stand in high value. Understanding the athlete's needs physically and psychologically within training is of great importance for me. Working with a high rate of Polynesian young boys, a lot of times they're under a lot of pressure from their family psychologically to perform, so they can become professional rugby players and provide for the whole family. Recognizing these signs of mental fatigue from these players is highly effective for us, so we can actually remove them from training, have a chat one-on-one, and see how we go from there. Communication is key to not just the coaches but to the players. Understanding what the best modes of communication are to the athletes is very important. Within the workplace, the Rebels work off the Rebels Creed. R stands for respect, yourself and the opposition. E is for excellence, highest standards in everything we do. Balance, sport and life, determination and humility. Ethos, team first, we not me. And leadership, challenge the status quo. Also, the social media department within the Melbourne Rebels work extensively to protect the integrity of the company. Every person, no matter volunteer like myself and the full-time employees, have to go through a social media induction. This is so any sort of misbehavior is stamped out straight away. Working with the high performance staff, they definitely detailed on why we work with the elite pathways. We collect information on each player so we can work with them as they grow through the elite pathways. Also, within the elite pathways, you are working with younger kids. The more we get them active, the better it's going to be, not just for rugby, but for children moving forward. We've got to beat that inactivity within Australia. The systems that were in place work very well. And future employment, well, I'm now a future full-time employee within the Rebels. Some references and my 2 email addresses should you have any questions moving forward on my work placement. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.